Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Victoria Derbyshire. Here are the headlines. Explosions over Ukraine's capital, Kiev, as the country fights for its future against a Russian offensive by land, sea and air. And in the past few minutes, videos online appear to show Russian tanks driving through the city. These are live pictures from a neighbourhood in Kiev damaged in Russian missile strikes. Fighting's been reported in cities across the country, including in Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv. If you are in Ukraine and watching this, do let me know how you are, where you are, and why you have taken the decision to stay. And if you are elsewhere in the world and have friends or family or work colleagues in Ukraine, what are you hearing about how they are doing? You can email victoria@bbc.co.uk or message me on social media. It's @VicDerbyshire. Families spend the night underground for protection in Ukraine's metro stations amid warnings of further strikes.
They say that civilians are not a target. It's a lie. The reality is that they don't differentiate between which areas to attack.
Thousands continue to escape from the capital, many heading for Ukraine's western borders. Hello, we are here for viewers on PBS, for viewers in the UK and for viewers right around the world. The Ukraine capital of Kiev is under fire as Russian troops continue their advance into the country. In the last hour, officials said Russian forces have reached the north of Kiev and they've encouraged locals to fight back. Air raid sirens have become a familiar sound in the city, with residents spending the night again in metro stations and basements for safety. This is the damage to an apartment block in Kiev after a Russian aircraft was reportedly shot down overnight. Several people were reportedly injured. Martial law has been imposed across Ukraine, with men between the ages of 18 to 60 barred from leaving the country. More than 100,000 people are thought to have left their homes seeking safety. Russia claims it's destroyed 80 military sites in the first wave of its attack. But the UK's Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, says around 450 Russian soldiers have been killed. President Zelensky of Ukraine has pleaded with the international community to do more and also has appealed to Russia for a ceasefire. He has also insisted he will not leave Kiev, even though he knows he is a target. Jonah Fisher has the latest.
This was the night after the day when everything changed for Ukraine and for Europe. Explosions above the capital, Kiev, a city of 3 million under attack, but fighting back. Air defences appear to have shot something, possibly a missile, down. The morning light shows damage to an apartment block where the debris fell. Safety now means going underground, metro stations becoming bomb shelters as Russia turns on its neighbour. Ukraine is on its own, President Zelensky warned. At 4 a.m, the Russian forces struck Ukrainian territory with rockets, he said. They say that civilians are not a target. It's a lie. The reality is that they don't differentiate between which areas to attack. On Thursday, the full force of the Russian military was unleashed. From the air came planes, helicopters and missile strikes. On the ground, tanks rolled across the borders to the north and to the south. From occupied Crimea, seized 8 years ago, Russia gained ground, as it did advancing from Belarus. The site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster has now changed hands. Crucially, an attempt at a lightning strike on Kiev appears to have been thwarted. An airstrip just outside the capital was captured by Russians arriving by helicopter, then taken back in fighting by Ukrainians later in the day. Having long believed that this was unthinkable, the streets heading west out of Kiev quickly filled with people desperately trying to leave. They may soon be crossing into the European Union. Spurned by NATO and under attack from the north, south and east, how long can Ukraine hold out? Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
We're going to show you these live pictures now. I'm told that this is a neighbourhood of Kiev, which is the capital, and there are, I mean, when you look at them, it looks like there are parts of some kind of jet on the ground. I don't know if this is a Russian jet, but we do know that a Russian jet, that Ukrainian officials say that a Russian jet was brought down by them overnight in Kiev. They could be parts of the Russian jet. I don't know. I can't confirm that, but we will try and get confirmation from on the ground. Right, let's talk to our correspondent James Waterhouse, who is in the capital. James, what has it been like overnight and this morning?
It's been a morning, Victoria, of air raid sirens, again faint sounds of explosions out of sight, not clear what direction they come from either because of the echoes that take place. People have been making their way down to bomb shelters, they've been metro stations. In our case, it's been an underground car park. Downstairs, people have been sleeping on some beds, there have been rows of chairs. Some people have looks of worry on their face, some have taken their dogs with them, tried to calm their children in what is an incredibly worrying, uncertain time. And yes, the picture of Kiev today is quiet and calm, but this is not the real Kiev. This had been a city that had refused to change in the face of this crisis. It had been vibrant and happening and busy until as recently as 36 hours ago, when all of this fighting started to take place. The latest on that front is that we are seeing Russian convoys of armoured vehicles making their way down just a few miles from here in the Obolon district, seemingly making their way unchallenged through the roads. We understand, according to the government, that there are saboteurs, Russian saboteurs already in the city. So we could be seeing Russian troops in the city, in the streets, sooner rather than later.
Right. I mean, potentially, what, by the end of the day? Is that what we're saying?
Well, one defence minister said yes, in terms of he sort of outlined the outskirts of the city. But if you're looking at what we're seeing in Obolon, look at what we're seeing with the intense fighting just 30 kilometres away at a key airbase. The Russians are encroaching on Kiev. This is part of a wider pincer hold by Russian troops. There are soldiers advancing from the south as well, which is causing the government quite a few headaches. There is ongoing fighting in central and southeastern Kiev. If you go to the northeast, there's been fighting in Kharkiv. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant is under Russian control now. So when you take all of these things into account and what we're seeing on those roads, and we've had colleagues run into, if you like, Russian paratroopers at the side of the road, only apparent by the unique colouring on their sleeves, all signs are pointing to Russia very much encircling and making their way inside this capital city, a capital city and country very much at war and very much under attack.
Okay, there are some videos circulating online. I haven't seen them yet. I've only just heard about this, which appear to show Russian tanks driving through Kiev. Have you seen them? Could this be plausible?
Yes, I think if you're asking me, they do look plausible. You're right to caveat them. We don't know just how reliable they are, given that we are in the midst of an information war as well as a huge amount of military activity. But we've seen reports of, and colleagues have seen gunfire, heavy gunfire, just a couple of kilometres away, further down the Dnipro River, between Russian saboteurs and Ukrainian forces. So security forces are putting up a fight. But I think when you take all of these things together, Russian troops are moving in, and as far as the West is concerned, their goal is to remove the Ukrainian government. President Zelensky has given another speech in the last few minutes. Part of that speech was in Russian. He was directly trying to appeal to Russian people as well to drop their support, if any, for this war, or try and highlight just how unjustified it is. But this has been a crisis of 8 years and counting. This is the most acute part of this crisis as Russian troops make their way into the capital city. The worry for so many people here, the fear of so many people, is what happens next. Vladimir Putin claims he's not here to occupy, he's here to calls it a special military mission where Ukrainian people can freely choose who they want to lead their country. That means absolutely nothing to people here. We've seen with the pictures you've shown previously where a jet was shot down. The Ukrainians claimed it was a Russian jet. We've had missiles intercepted overnight, debris falling everywhere. We know at least 137 Ukrainians have lost their lives so far. That is already going to be higher as I speak to you. Now we have the third incident of an air raid siren going off. This is the reality of war. This is what is happening right now as this crisis reaches a bubbling point with ordinary Ukrainians at the heart of it.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll be back to you. Thank you. I think we are able to show you now some of this footage, which is said to be Russian tanks driving through the capital. If we just get rid of the words across the bottom, then there you can see a bus behind what appears to be a tank. We'll run this again. It's quite short. There it is. Okay, let's have a look. Pause. Yeah. So yeah, we can see a couple of tanks there, and then, you know, it's just surreal, isn't it? Because there's what looks to be like a normal civilian bus behind. And that is said to be somewhere in the capital. Thank you for your emails, particularly for people who are in Ukraine. Just let me read this for the moment. This is from Stanislav, who says, I am staying in Ukraine with my wife and daughter. She is 12, and we are near a civil airport near the capital. There were no shootings still, but we have heard the bombs from Kiev. We are not leaving as we believe that our army will not let the Russians take Kiev. Running out is bad, as we have to support our soldiers and keep doing our jobs. We have underfloor in case of bombing. Thank you for your support. Thank you for taking the time to get in touch with us, Stanislav. We're going to go to Moscow now and talk to our correspondent there, Jenny Hill. Jenny, tell us what the Kremlin is saying about its operation. Have they confirmed that there are tanks in the Ukraine capital?
They have not, but they have said that as far as they're concerned, it's all going very well. Late last night, we heard from the Defence Ministry, who said that, in their words, the day's tasks had been successfully completed. They say that they have taken out more than 80 Ukrainian military targets, including air bases and missile defence systems. So as far as they're concerned, all is going as planned. It's difficult, of course, to know what the end game here is. Vladimir Putin has said he doesn't want to occupy Ukraine, but then he said he didn't want to invade Ukraine. We know that he sees this as a territory which he believes should be under Russian control, and a spokesperson for the Kremlin yesterday did say that the mission is there to neutralise, I'm quoting, neutralise the military potential of Ukraine. Asked whether the Ukrainian government should be replaced in the Kremlin's view, he replied, no comment. So very difficult to know what the plan there is, but we know that Vladimir Putin is increasingly consumed with a dream, an ambition to create a Russia which wields greater power and influence on the world stage, and which in effect challenges the security architecture of Europe.
And Russia has just announced that it's banning British Airlines from landing in the country. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this just came from the Federal Aviation Agency, who had already said that they were threatening retaliatory measures against Britain after it banned Aeroflot, the Russian carrier, from British soil. So they've just said, as of about an hour ago, in actual fact, British Airlines are banned now from either landing in Russia or transiting, using its airspace too. The first of what are expected to be a series of counter sanctions. President Putin has said that Russia is expecting sanctions, that it's prepared for them. It has something like $600 billion worth of reserves. But most international analysts expect Western sanctions on Russia to pinch, that they will inflict significant economic damage. Whether that is spun by the Kremlin when it comes to how that will affect ordinary Russians and their finances, there is, I think, a sense that that might be spun by the Kremlin to suggest to Russians that these sanctions are being imposed by the West to punish Russia, to punish Russian people. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Russian people respond and whether Mr. Putin loses support as a result. It's worth pointing out, actually, last night there were significant protests across the country in more than 50 cities. People turned out to voice their dissent of Mr. Putin's actions in Ukraine. It's not an easy country in which to protest. The voice of protest is usually silenced very quickly, and we saw that last night with around about 1,800 people detained simply for peacefully protesting. Here in Moscow, I saw some of the people gathering, largely young people. Looked very peaceful to me, but here in Moscow alone, around about 1,000 people were arrested for protesting.
And I mean, is the ultimate aim from the Kremlin that Russian troops will get rid of President Zelensky in Ukraine and put in their own pro-Russian leader?
We can only speculate. I mean, this is, as one European foreign minister put it recently, you know, we are not inside Mr. Putin's head. No one knows really what he is planning. And so all we can do is look to what he's written about Ukraine, what he's written about the West, NATO, Russia's position, and what he's said recently. If you look at that speech that he gave before the invasion went ahead, you get the sense from that there is, some would say, certainly almost an obsession with the humiliation that Mr. Putin sees Russia as having suffered when the Soviet Union broke up, and that he is driven by this ambition to give Russia a greater sway, greater influence, to tackle NATO. As you know, he's very concerned about the eastwards expansion of NATO. So there's a lot going on when you look at what he has to say, and much of it rooted in Russian history in the past. But it's very difficult to really put a finger on what that actually means in terms of practicalities and where he plans to stop. I think there is a sense here that Western sanctions won't deter him from his current course. Okay. We will have to see. But certainly this is a man who some say may no longer be in touch with the world, with his own people. He is, of course, surrounded by advisors, but very few of them are able to be candid with him, to tell him what's really happening. It may be that he simply doesn't care what people think, that now his overriding concern is creating this Russia of his imagination, which would return it, in effect, to what he would see as the glories of the Soviet Union.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Jenny Hill in Moscow. Let's talk to Sarah Rainford, who's in Dnipro, which is in the east of Ukraine. What has it been like there overnight, Sarah?
Well, this is a really strategic city in Ukraine. It's on the river Dnipro, this vast river that separates east from western Ukraine. And we moved here last night from the Donetsk region to the east of here, which is where, of course, there has been a conflict in Ukraine for the past 8 years, but where the front line has been pretty fixed until now, but where Russian troops are now supporting the pro-Russian militia in trying to push through that line and advance further into this country. So we know that there have been clashes there today. There were clashes there yesterday. So an extremely serious situation there on the ground. Here in Dnipro itself, it was quiet overnight. There were some explosions on the first night of Mr. Putin's war here in Ukraine, but pretty quiet at the moment. The trams are running on the street. There's traffic. There are people out and about. I've seen them walking their dogs, and kind of life this morning at least seems and looks to be relatively normal. But certainly what we saw as we headed here to this city was a lot of people on the move, cars from the Donetsk region heading west, hoping to head to relative safety. Also, people being evacuated by train. We know that from the whole of the Donbass region, some 7,000 people yesterday were put onto trains. Some of them didn't really know where their final destination was. And one of the groups that one of our colleagues saw getting on the train was a group of children from a local orphanage. So a real chaotic time as people don't quite know what lies ahead here, what exactly is happening and where they might be safe in this country, which is coming under attack now in so many parts, so many regions. And of course, Kiev, where many people would have been heading to from here, is now no longer safe at all. So people are really trying to consider their options and wonder where they can take shelter and ride this out.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. This email from Alice, who says, "Hi Victoria, my name is Alice. I'm currently in Kiev. Me and my family are in a relatively safe region of the capital, but everyone is still very afraid and are hiding in shelters. It is no longer possible to leave Kiev. My friends from Konotop, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, and Donetsk are saying they are also hiding and they're only hearing guns and bombs. My colleagues from work tonight at 4 a.m. have seen how Russia's missiles have been destroyed, and now she is currently hiding in a shelter as well. Olga is here. I spoke to my friend yesterday. She lives in Kiev. Her family is terrified. We spoke when the Russian helicopters were hovering above the capital. My friend said if the West does not help Ukraine now, it will be the end of the country. I did offer her and her family to come and stay here in England until the situation is calmer, but she doesn't want to leave as she's scared of people ransacking her home. She says the roads are blocked with fleeing people and she would still need to get a visa for all of her family to come over here anyway. So she cannot and does not want to leave." And Kavita is in Oman. "I just wanted to share my outrage at what is happening in Ukraine. There is a real sense of helplessness at my end." Well, large numbers of people living in Ukraine are on the move, fleeing from the Russian forces. The United Nations says 100,000 people have left their homes so far, and many are going to the bordering countries of Poland, Romania and Hungary. Right, let's take you to one of the crossing points. Our correspondent Nick Thorpe is on the border between Ukraine and Hungary. And tell us specifically where you are, Nick.
Yes, I'm at Bereg Shurany. It's the crossing over to Aste on the Ukrainian side. On the far side, on the Ukrainian side, this is an area of where largely ethnic Hungarians, obviously Ukrainian citizens, live. And in the last hours and all through the day yesterday, we've had hundreds, probably now going into the thousands, of people fleeing across this border. Many of them local people from the villages and towns on the far side, most of them fleeing actually on foot, many with small children pulling their bags with them. What they're telling us is that obviously there's no actual fighting or bombing on that side, but they're very afraid that either the war reaches to their villages and towns on the far side, but they're also afraid that their young men will be called up to fight. Some of the young men I've spoken to here who got across before that was closed, before the Ukrainians said that no more men of military age can cross the border, did manage to cross in the night. People just basically fleeing for their lives, fleeing out of fear.
And do you expect to see more people as the hours and days go by?
Absolutely. This morning I spoke to a grandmother and her 16-year-old daughter. They had driven from Kharkiv in the...
We've still got you, Nick. Nick, we've still got you, but suddenly we can't hear you. Nick, we'll come back to you. I do apologise. I don't know what happened because we could still see you. We just couldn't hear you. Now, as the Russian invasion began, photojournalist Alex Lurie travelled from the eastern part of Ukraine to the capital city of Kiev, documenting the devastation that he was seeing. And we can talk to him now, actually. Alexandra Matviachuk, who heads up... I beg your pardon, that is our next guest. I do apologise. First of all, can you hear me, sir? Good morning from us.
I can hear you, yeah.
Right, thank you very much. Just tell our audience right around the world who you are and what you have been doing so far, sir, during this conflict.
My name's Alex Laurie. I'm a photojournalist. As you said yesterday, I woke up in Donbass. Me and a couple other friends, a couple other journalists, went up to Kharkiv and then over to Kiev, as you said, documenting the situation.
What have you seen, Alex?
Well, yesterday we all woke up in a completely different country, completely different world. The first thing we saw was around sometime in the morning was a gigantic plume of smoke rising up from the area around Kharkiv, a town called Shukhiv, I believe. And we were investigating that. And we saw an apartment complex that had been heavily damaged by Russian munitions, a lot of blood, a lot of emergency response, at least one confirmed fatality that I saw with my own eyes. And then we came to Kiev and this morning saw another civilian residence that had been affected by Russian munitions.
Okay. And now you're in the capital. What do you see there?
Well, right now it's very eerie. It's much different than last week I was here and it was totally normal. People were, grocery shopping, going to work, going on dates, and now it's pretty much either empty or a gigantic traffic jam heading west.
I'm going to pause you, Alex. I'll be with you back with you in 1 second, because for viewers on PBS in America, we say goodbye and thank you very much for watching. Do carry on, Alex, with telling us what's going on in the capital.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So now it's either empty or long lines at gas stations, pharmacies, ATMs, and the highway out west.
Okay.
Heading west.
Are you afraid?
I'm not reassured.
Okay, but you're going to stay there, obviously.
Until it's too dangerous, I think so.
I mean, there are reports of tanks in the capital this morning. I don't know if they are Russian tanks, if they are Ukrainian tanks. I don't know if they're missile launchers. I've just seen video online. We've showed it to our viewers. It's not clear which side they're from. I mean, does that make you apprehensive?
But there's a lot about the situation that makes me apprehensive and makes me want to, be aware of my surroundings. But, I couldn't confirm what you just said personally.
No. From the people that you talk to, as you meet, as you're documenting what's going on in the country, what are Ukrainians saying to you about whether they're staying, whether they're making the decision to leave, what they think President Putin wants ultimately?
Well, that really comes down to the individual. Some people are like, there's no way I'm leaving. This is home. This is where my pets are. This is where my stuff is. And other people are like, I have to get out of here ASAP. Some people I've been talking to have said, they don't know. Like, should they be in the basement? Should they be in the metro station during the airstrike? Should they pick up everything and leave? It really comes down to the individual. A few people have voiced frustration with what they see as the lack of help from Western countries. Other people have been very friendly upon hearing that I'm a U.S. citizen. So it really comes down to the individual, I would say.
Okay. So where are you going to next, Alex? What do you do now?
So right now we're investigating something here in Kiev. I don't want to say anything before it's confirmed. But we have to be really light on the balls of our feet here. Obviously, we don't want to get encircled. We don't want to get captured or hurt. So that's priority number one. And then priority number two is we just have to respond to situations as they develop. Okay.
I mean, is it clear to either Ukrainian military or Russian forces that you are a journalist?
I try and make it as clear as possible. When I'm out working in a situation where I feel like that identification is absolutely crucial, I am very clearly marked. Right now I'm in a car, so I'm not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for talking to us, Alex, and take care. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No doubt we'll talk again. Now, some emails from you. Thank you very much for getting in touch from around the world. This gentleman says he wants to be anonymous. He says this is not a war against just Ukraine, but a war against democracy, freedom, NATO and the West. After Ukraine, Russia will mass its military along the western border where NATO have built its defences and military. Then Putin will insist that the build-up of NATO military is a threat to Russian security and insist that if NATO doesn't remove its troops from the border, it will take action to protect Russia. where does it end? And Paul tells us about a friend of his who was working in Ukraine. He says that he has been evacuated to the Russian-held side, but as far as he knows, he's okay so far. We're going to welcome back viewers now on BBC World News. We're going to talk to somebody who is in Kiev right now, Alexandra Matviachuk, who heads up the human rights organisation, the Centre for Civil Liberties, and coordinates the work of the Euromaidan SOS Initiative Group. And Alexandra, tell our viewers what that is.
Hello. We had the shelling of Kiev whole night, and a lot of people spent this night in bomb shellings. Also now there are Syrians in Kiev, and everybody asked to go to bomb shelter, and that's why I moved from the center to another part in outskirts of Kiev in order to have connection and to continue my work, which I do for current moment.
And tell us about your work, Alexandra.
We try to help with logistics because there are a lot of needs, different kinds of needs, and with with sharing information to people who need it.
Okay. And are you going to stay where you are now?
I plan to return when this alarm sign will finish. I plan to return to my home.
Okay.
If it will be a home.
Well, yeah. I mean, how do you cope with that? You may go back and it may have been wrecked, destroyed. It may not be there anymore.
This night, the Russians shelling the housing block. So we don't know what will be further. These 2 days will be much more difficult for us. And that's why Ukrainians ask the West to close the sky. Yes. In order to help us to walk the ground. Yeah.
I mean, there have been warnings that Russian troops could be in Kiev by the end of the day. And certainly the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken thinks ultimately President Putin wants to get rid of President Zelensky and install his own sort of puppet leader, if you like. I mean, if that happens, would you stay in your country?
If that happens, we will fight. And everybody, I'm not a soldier, I am a human rights defender, but all of us find some way how to be useful in this situation. Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of freedom. And for Ukrainians, freedom is the most important value.
How do you fight somebody like President Putin, who is a vicious, evil dictator?
He is people from last century. He tried to return Ukraine to the logic of the Cold War. He tried to return Ukraine to the Russian Empire. But Ukrainian people 8 years ago stand up for our democratic choice, and we pay a high price for it. Hundreds of unarmed people were killed in the center of capital. Now we have a possibility to move to the way of democratic transformation. And that's why Putin started this war, because he afraid that the freedom will be closer and closer to his border and threaten his authoritarian regime. Ukraine is a key to Russia.
Do you think your country is getting enough help from Western countries, from NATO, the military alliance of 30 countries, from the European Union?
What means enough help? It means a help which is enough to stop Putin. Unfortunately, we saw that Putin go further. So we saw this is announced sanctions is not working properly. Maybe in future, but we need time now. We need time now in order to resist. And that's why we ask the West not only isolate Russia, but also take proactive measures to stop Putin.
Okay. Thank you very much for talking to us, Alexandra. Thank you. Just to say those pictures, thank you for your time. We do appreciate it, and do take care. Those pictures we were just showing appear to be military vehicles in the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. It's not clear to me. I'm not a military expert whether they are Ukrainian vehicles or if they are Russian vehicles, but there have been reports. Well, let's have a look again. I mean, I still won't be able to tell you because I'm just not that kind of an expert, so do forgive me. But there are reports of Russian troops to the north of the capital. OK, if you're just tuning in, welcome. Let's take you through what has happened so far on day 2 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The capital, Kiev, is under fire, with officials confirming that Russian forces have reached the north of the city. This is that video again. It's from social media. It appears to show Russian tanks driving through a residential district of Obolon. We've seen pictures of what looks to be the wreckage of a plane after a Russian aircraft was reportedly shot down over Kiev last night. Again, I can't tell you if that's the wreckage of a Russian plane. We know that some people are thought to have been injured after that jet came down, though. Martial law has been imposed across the whole of Ukraine, and men between the ages of 18 to 60 have been barred from leaving the country, presumably in case they are needed to fight. More than 100,000 people are thought to have left their homes seeking safety. And Russia claims it's destroyed 80 military sites in the first wave of its attack. Here, the UK Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, says actually 450 Russian soldiers have been killed. President Zelensky has pleaded with the international community to do more and also appealed to Russia for a ceasefire. He also said he would not leave Kiev, even though he knows he could be killed. He's an assassination target. Last night, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said President Putin's invasion, which he called cynical and brutal, must fail. The UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss will speak to senior Chinese and Polish diplomats today to try to build support for further sanctions against Russia. Speaking earlier, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said that Russia has failed to achieve its planned objectives over the last 36 hours, according to intelligence he had, and also confirmed that he would not send British troops to fight directly with Russian troops.
They've lost approximately 450 personnel, the Russian forces. They've lost a significant number of tanks and armoured vehicles, and indeed the Ukrainians have brought down a fighter jet, or I think 3 fighter jets at least, and a number of helicopters. And if you remember, President Putin's, one of his reasons for this was all about putting forces into the Donbass. He has failed to break through the Donbass line of control, which was supposed to be one of the reasons he was doing this. So while Russia is huge in its forces, and while Russia is obviously entering Ukraine through a number of different axes, from the south, from the north, from Belarus, and remember that promise, they were all going to leave Belarus, and through the east of the country, they haven't achieved their goals so far. I said very clearly about a month ago that we are not going to be sending British troops to fight directly with Russian troops. We are going to hold the line in NATO. We've always supported Ukraine's application to NATO over the last 15 years. Not every country has wanted them to join. We've done the next best thing, which is train over 20,000 Ukrainians, provided them with lethal capabilities, which they are using right now. And, but I'm not putting British troops directly to fight Russian troops. That would trigger a European war, because we are a NATO country, and Russia would therefore be attacking NATO.
Well, the Prime Minister has announced fresh economic sanctions against Russia, calling it the largest and most severe package Russia has ever faced. These include freezing the assets of all major Russian banks and totally excluding them from the UK financial system. 100 companies and individuals will face financial sanctions, including several oligarchs and Russia's biggest defence company. The exportation of military equipment and oil refinery goods is going to be suspended. And the Russian airline Aeroflot has been banned from landing in the UK. And in the last half hour, actually, Russia has banned British Airlines from landing in their country. Let's talk now to Chair of the UK Government Defence Select Committee. We spoke to him yesterday. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. Hello again, Mr. Ellwood. What's your assessment of where we are today?
Well, I think the penny is dropping, firstly, or that the world is certainly getting more dangerous, not less. And we've entered actually a new era of instability where states are willing to use brute force to further their interests. And we need to ask ourselves, do we stand by and watch? Or what can we do to alter the trajectory of events? I do hope the bigger picture is now recognised that we need to review our defence posture, our size, our composition, increase our defence spending to 3%, not just here, but across NATO, because this relative peace that we've enjoyed for the last 3 decades, we need to recognise is not the norm. It's been an unusual period of peace, and we're now reverting back to type. More instability, more insecurity, more challenges from dictators as we're having to deal with now. I'm pleased that we're seeing some solidarity in Parliament. We've got further sanctions coming into place, but I do question as to why we continue to bench NATO. This is the one significant asset that Putin is worried about, concerned about, and I think we could use greater utility of this deterrent, this defence deterrent, in shaping events in the future.
OK, but where we are now in a debate about defence spending, populations in the West will have that debate at some point. But now, today, is there anything that can stop President Putin from taking over the whole of Ukraine, getting rid of President Zelensky and installing his own puppet leader? We've just lost you.
To be honest, I think there's very little that can be done now. Russian troops are on the march. They've taken over the country. As you heard from the Defense Secretary, they're not actually pushing from the Donbass region. They're coming in from the north and from the south. We need to ask ourselves, what more can we do to support the Ukrainian armed forces? They are asking for more weapon systems, light, heavy weapon systems, counter cyber capabilities, but particularly anti-aircraft capabilities. Fantastic efforts to bring down Russian jets and so forth. That will boost morale. It is ownership of the airspace that's critical for Russia if they want to advance their infantry and their tanks and so forth towards the capital itself. There's then humanitarian support as well for refugees and so on, potentially a government in exile. And then we move into another phase, which is the insurgency too, of what can be done to support an insurgency package if Russia does take over. But there's a bigger picture forming here as well, because Russia exploits the art of deception. We need to watch what's going on in the Balkans, for example, and in the Arctic, other parts of the world too, because this is what Russia and indeed other authoritarian regimes do. Take advantage of us being focused, distracted on one particular thing to do something elsewhere. We need to watch our backs. OK. You said NATO troops are on the bench, essentially. Where do you want to see NATO troops? Well, this is for NATO and a conversation with Ukraine to take place rather than for me. I'm simply saying that there are options available, a spectrum of involvement that NATO can provide to the extremists of providing, let's say, a no-fly zone, a partial no-fly zone, let's say west of the Dnipro River, for example. That would change the optics, change the dynamics in the country itself. Yes, it would put us in direct confrontation with Russia. My question is if we step back, if we hesitate, if we are timid now, is that simply going to delay a bigger battle in the future? Sorry, I just want to be clear. Are you talking about NATO troops? So troops from the UK, the USA, France, Germany, Poland, etc., in Ukraine or not? I'm suggesting that this is a conversation that we need to seriously have as to how we utilise our military capabilities to support a country that's just been invaded by another power, which may include the consideration of a partial or total no-fly zone. OK. Thank you very much for talking to us again today. Thank you, Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP and Chair of the UK's Defence Select Committee. Going to bring you these pictures now. I am told they show, I'm just waiting for them, bear with me, they show a briefing of various UN agencies in Geneva. They're being told about, given the latest intelligence about where Russian troops are across Ukraine. And as UNICEF representative also mentioned before, here, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that the current sanctions against Russia don't go far enough, but that UK political parties do stand united.
past, we have not been effective and strong enough when it comes to Crimea, the Donbass or other examples, and that has allowed Putin to think that the benefits of aggression outweigh the costs. This time we must be united with our allies with the strongest possible response, providing support in Ukraine, financial support, the equipment that's being provided to Ukraine, dealing with the humanitarian issues and sanctions, the like of which we haven't seen before. Now, I don't think the sanctions the Prime Minister put forward earlier this week were strong enough. Yesterday he put forward a stronger package. I immediately said that we would support that. I want the government to go further. On Monday there will be further legislation and we will push the government further. But I do want to be absolutely clear that at a moment like this, with Russia in an act of aggression invading Ukraine, in the United Kingdom, our political parties will stand together.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who is at Westminster. OK, so, I mean, I'm getting emails from people in Ukraine saying, please, can the West do more? What else is the British government suggesting it's going to do to try to, I don't know, stop President Putin taking over Ukraine?
Well, there's a couple of things that seem to be on the table within the next few days and weeks, Victoria. So firstly, more support for Ukrainian forces, so that might mean equipment, defensive equipment, things like that. We've heard ministers talk about that in the last few days. There's also the possibility that some of the sanctions that have been announced in the last few days could be extended to cover more people, perhaps more industries as well. What you were talking about with Tobias Ellwood there, the idea of perhaps trying to enforce a no-fly zone, perhaps even involving NATO troops in Ukraine, I think that's really unlikely. We've heard the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace say this morning that he is determined to avoid a situation where you have any British or NATO troops directly fighting with Russian troops, for the simple reason that that would lead to a massive escalation of this crisis in Europe. That's the view of the UK government, so I struggle to see how that's going to change anytime soon. There's also that question, one of the things Keir Starmer was talking about this morning, one of the things that some Ukrainian politicians like the foreign minister have been calling for is for Western countries to remove Russia from the SWIFT system, which is basically really important for financial transactions globally. The thinking is if you took Russia out of that, it would go further towards crippling Russia's ability to trade globally. That's something the UK has been pushing for, I'm told, privately. It's something the Prime Minister tried to get other countries to agree to yesterday at a virtual G7 meeting, but there's not unanimity on that at the moment. Germany in particular is quite reluctant, so that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. So more sanctions against individuals, yes, I think that's quite a possibility. More aid for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian military, yes, but in terms of boots on the ground, I can't see that happening.
Thank you very much, Nick. Let's just bring you this breaking news. UEFA have stripped St. Petersburg, that's Russia's second city, of the opportunity of hosting the Champions League final, which was due at the end of May, and they have moved the final to Paris. So UEFA have said that because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, St. Petersburg will not be hosting the Champions League final at the end of May. It will be moved to Paris. At an emergency summit last night to discuss the Russia crisis, EU leaders agreed to expand their sanctions package. They also announced they would be imposing separate sanctions on Belarus, which is where Russian military were doing those exercises in the days running up to the invasion. Belarus, a key ally of President Putin. Let's talk now to our correspondent in Brussels, Jessica Parker. So what are these sanctions involving, Jessica?
So the latest set of sanctions from the EU against Russia, because we don't have the details of sanctions on Belarus yet, involve targeting its financial sector, so limiting its access to financial markets, particularly targeting Russian banks, the defence sector, also export bans on materials that will prevent Russia from upgrading its oil refineries, and export bans on aircraft parts, equipment, which the EU says will really hurt Russia's commercial airlines companies. So those are some of the sanctions announced overnight in the early hours of this morning by the European Union. The EU keeps describing its sanctions package as massive and that it'll have severe costs on Russia. And in the longer term, of course, that may well be true in terms of eating into Russia's industrial base. But I think the slight problem this morning for the EU is that there is a lot of discussion about SWIFT and the EU's apparent reluctance to cut Russia off from that international payment system, as Nick was just outlining in Westminster, and as well its reluctance to look at the idea of starting to cut its imports of energy from Russia as well, really seen as the most radical options. And as you see explosions on the ground in Kiev, I think for the EU, as it says its sanctions package is massive, clearly it isn't stopping President Putin, and in a way it's not designed to. The package is being outlined as the invasion has happened and is happening, but I think there will be continued pressure on the EU to do more. But for every time it tries to inflict a cost on Russia, of course, there is the risk that Russia might bring forward counter-sanctions, and imposing sanctions on President Putin will naturally, in many areas, cost the EU and EU citizens as well.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Let's talk now to Marta Mulyak, who is a board member of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain. Marta, hello to you.
Good morning, Britain.
I've just got this email from somebody who is in Ukraine. There are two of them, and she says we're currently in a basement about half a kilometre from the Golden Gate in Kiev, so almost the city centre. We've got food, we've got drink, the power is still on. At first, we felt safe, but now we have to wonder what we will see when we come out. Will there be Russian soldiers waiting for us? Will our exit be blocked with rubble? For now, all we can do is wait. We are praying for other countries to protect Ukraine's peaceful way of life. I do not feel the Ukrainian people can fight this war alone. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and nor should they. This is not just the war in Ukraine. This is the war of democracy that we're observing now. When the Second World War was starting, no one believed, and especially Britain didn't believe, that they would ever become part of that horror that happened in 1945. Yesterday, we were protesting at the Downing Street, and we were standing there just next to the remembrance memorials, and no Ukrainians want more of those remembrance memorials across the Europe. So we are very worried, but this is the war not just for Ukraine, but the whole democracy and Europe.
What do you think President Putin wants?
It is really hard to really know what he wants. I think he keeps changing his mind. His first goal is to have Ukraine as a puppet country inside Russia. Well, that's never going to happen. Ukraine has a long-standing history with Russia. We have been occupied, not occupied, in the union with Russia. We had many different ways of trying to work together. Ukraine has a very clear course on independence, on strong and independent country. And this is what, as a first step, Putin is trying to deter, is that strong independence. And second of all, he's trying to show the world his power, that he can do anything and he can get away with anything. And I fear that if he's not stopped in Ukraine, he will go further. And the next step can be Warsaw. The next step can be Berlin, even though Germany for now supports in many ways Russia. Well, that's at least what we're seeing from their actions. And then,
well, they did cancel the gas pipeline, which is a pretty major, significant thing.
It is, of course it is, but now we're seeing an opposition in switching off SWIFT, and SWIFT is something that is funding this war and is funding Russian army, and we need to understand the scale of it. Russia has to be switched off and cut off from any financial supply to the country and to the army.
Thank you very much. Thank you for talking to us, Marta.
No problem.
Oil prices have risen again this morning after concerns over tightening supplies as Russian forces continue their invasion of Ukraine. But stock markets in Europe and Asia rebounded as investors assessed Western sanctions on Russia. OK, let's put this in plain English for normal people who are watching around the world. What does that mean and why is that significant?
It means that yesterday investors were very worried about what was going to be announced by the United States, by the European Union in terms of sanctions. They didn't know what to expect. So we saw share prices heading downwards and we saw the cost of oil and the cost of gas heading sharply upwards. Today, the sanctions have been announced. They're quite severe in some areas, but at least they're a known quantity. And as a result of that, you have a little bit more money going back into the market. So we've had a small recovery on the financial markets in Europe, quite a big one on the financial markets in Moscow, which were devastated yesterday, really. And, you know, there was
So they've rallied, have they?
They've rallied.
Because yesterday, the Foreign Office Minister, the UK Foreign Office Minister, was saying, look, because of sanctions, the Russian stock market's dropped by 30%. So Putin's going to find it much harder to fund this war. So what are they back up to today?
Well, it depends which index you look at, but one of them is up 14%, another is up 20%. Now, that's a rally, but they're still very much lower than they were before all this started off. So there has been a hit. There has been a hit to confidence. Shares in companies like Gazprom or Rosneft, Sberbank, the kind of companies that are targeted by sanctions or that could...
These are massive oil companies in Russia.
Massive oil companies that could lose out if there was any friction involved in the trade in oil and gas. Their shares have been down. So, you know, there is a financial impact here. But we're seeing a little bit of a recovery because where the markets are concerned, a known quantity is always better than an unknown potential.
Right, OK. In terms of, obviously, oil and gas prices going upwards, that affects pretty much everyone around the world in terms of their energy bills, briefly, Theo?
Certainly does. In terms of the oil price, pretty much everybody. Oil affects manufacturing, it affects transport. In terms of the gas price, Europe gets 40% of its gas from Russia, so that feeds through into our household bills, but other parts of the world are less exposed to that.
Thank you very much, Theo. That's it. You can contact us by using the hashtag BBC Your Questions.
Hello there. Well, we've got a quieter spell of weather out there at the moment, particularly compared to this time last week when we were just feeling the effects of Storm Eunice. Higher pressure out there today, keeping things dry and settled, but it's certainly a chilly start to the morning. We've had some frost around and also some icy stretches across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England as well. So we've had quite a cold air mass with us already today, but we've got this ridge of high pressure building in from the west, some slightly milder air trying to move in on that weather front across the far northwest. So that'll be meaning a bit more cloud will push across Northern Ireland and western Scotland through the day. A few splashes of rain up towards the Western Isles and parts of Highland as well. But elsewhere for eastern Scotland, much of England and Wales into eastern parts of Northern Ireland, it's dry and fine with some sunshine and lighter winds than we've seen recently. So it will feel that little bit warmer than we've seen over recent days. We've lost the heavy showers and the wind chill that we had yesterday. So 8 to 11 degrees, top temperatures through the afternoon. But as we head into the evening hours, once the sun sets, it's going to turn quite chilly quite quickly, particularly across England and Wales. More cloud for Scotland and Northern Ireland through tonight with more of a breeze here. So temperatures staying up in mid to high single figures. But for England and Wales, we're expecting a frost, particularly towards the east of England. And in the countryside, temperatures could well be a few degrees below freezing. So we start the weekend on that chilly note, but we've got high pressure still very close on Saturday. We've got a weather front trying to move in from the Atlantic, but as it bumps into that high pressure, it is going to be struggling to move across the UK. We'll just bring more cloud again to Northern Ireland and Scotland. England and Wales keeping long spells of sunshine and light winds, so a much quieter spell of weather through the weekend. Top temperatures Saturday around about 9 to 12 degrees. That'll feel fairly pleasant in the sunshine and the light winds too. But breezier conditions up towards the northwest of the UK ahead of this weather front, which just tries to slip in as we head through into Sunday. But it bumps into that area of high pressure, so it'll fizzle out as it moves its way eastwards across the UK. Does mean we are expecting perhaps a few splashes of rain on Sunday in the north and the west initially. But as this band just tracks eastwards, I think any rain will be very light and patchy, and probably eastern parts of England should keep the sunshine all day. Top temperatures on Sunday around about 8 to 11 degrees, not far off what we'd expect really for this time of year. It does look like then things turn a little bit more unsettled to start the new working week. Some rain around for many of us, I think, on Monday, and then dry and settled weather returns as we head through into the first week of March. So certainly a more settled spell of weather as we head through today and into the weekend, but perhaps something a little bit more unsettled again early on next week.
News today. She's broadening her horizons. He's growing his knowledge. They're searching for expert opinions. She's dying for a lively discussion. He's taking stock of the situation. She wants to dive deeper. They just need a conversation starter. Everyone's news all in one place. The papers, tonight at 10:30 and 11:30 on the BBC News Channel.